Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she adjusted her scope, the crosshairs dancing across a target 2 miles away through the scratched glass of an F-22 Raptor's cockpit. Below in the valley, 12 Delta Force operators lay pinned down by enemy fire, their extraction impossible without air support. The unconscious pilot slumped in his ejection seat was their only hope of survival, but he was unreachable by conventional means. What nobody knew was that the woman they'd called Barbie with a rifle and dismissed from the most elite sniper program in the military was about to attempt the most impossible shot in combat history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A shot that would either save America's most elite soldiers or confirm every doubt anyone had ever had about women in combat. The margin for error was 0. The consequences of failure were 12 lives lost and a $150 million fighter jet destroyed. But Sarah had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even when everyone told her it would never come. 6 months earlier, Sarah Mitchell stepped off the military transport at Fort Braxton Special Operations Training Center with nothing but a worn duffel bag and a rifle case that had belonged to her grandfather. The North Carolina humidity hit her like a wall as she surveyed the sprawling complex of concrete buildings and training ranges carved into the Appalachian foothills. This was it, the Special Operations Precision Marksman Course, the most exclusive sniper training program in the American military, feeding directly into Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and other units so classified their names were never spoken aloud. Around her, the other candidates moved with the swagger of men who had never been told they couldn't do something. Their brand new tactical gear gleamed in the afternoon sun, expensive rifles worth more than most people's cars slung casually over their shoulders. Sarah watched them compare equipment specifications and deployment stories, each trying to establish dominance in the unspoken hierarchy that forms when elite soldiers gather. Her own weapon, a heavily modified .338 Lapua Magnum that her grandfather had carried as a hunting guide in Montana, felt suddenly inadequate in its battered leather case. Lieutenant Marcus Kane caught sight of her as she approached the formation. He was everything the military seemed to prize in a sniper, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident bearing that made other soldiers instinctively defer to him. His voice carried easily across the group as he made his observation loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. Did someone order a stripper for the welcome party? The comment drew immediate laughter from several candidates, the kind of cruel amusement that feeds on someone else's discomfort. Sarah didn't respond. She'd learned growing up on a ranch in Montana that sometimes silence carried more weight than any comeback ever could. Instead, she quietly pulled out her leather-bound shooting journal, its pages thick with hand-drawn weather charts, wind pattern analyses, and ballistic calculations she'd been perfecting since she was 12 years old. While others boasted about their military backgrounds and combat deployments, she studied the range flags snapping in the mountain wind, already calculating variables that would matter when the shooting started. The formation quieted as Captain James Harrison, the lead instructor, emerged from the operations building. He was a compact man with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in special operations, and his reputation preceded him. Harrison had trained snipers who had gone on to make shots that changed the course of battles, and his approval was worth more than any medal to the candidates gathered before him. When he reached Sarah's name on his roster, he paused, consulting his clipboard with an expression that suggested he was looking at a clerical error that had somehow made it through the system. "Mitchell Sarah," he called out, his tone neutral but carrying an undertone of skepticism. "You're the police sniper from Montana?" It wasn't really a question, more like a confirmation of something he found hard to believe. Sarah stood it. attention and responded with the crisp professionalism she'd learned in her 12 years with the Montana State Police. "Yes, sir, requesting permission to join the Special Operations Precision Marksman course." Harrison looked her up and down, taking in her worn BDUs that had seen better days, boots that were clean but clearly well used, and the obvious age difference between her gear and the high-tech equipment surrounding her. At 31, she was older than most candidates by at least 5 years, and in a military culture that often equated youth with capability, those years felt like decades. "Right," he said finally, his tone suggesting he was reserving judgment, until he saw what she could do. "We'll see what you're made of, Mitchell." The first day's briefing made the program's philosophy crystal clear. Speed, aggression, and overwhelming firepower were the cornerstones of modern special operations. The course motto was painted in block letters across the operations center wall: fast, accurate, deadly. Everything about the program emphasized rapid target engagement, quick decision-making, and the ability to deliver precise fire under extreme time pressure. The instructors spoke about split-second opportunities and the need to make shots that could change the course of an entire operation in the space of a heartbeat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah listened to the briefing with growing unease. Everything she'd learned about long-range precision shooting emphasized patience, careful observation, and the discipline to wait for the perfect shot rather than taking the first available one. Her grandfather had taught her that hunting elk in the Montana wilderness required an entirely different mindset than quick target shooting. You had to read the land, understand the wind, and most importantly, know when not to take the shot. But looking around at the eager faces of her fellow candidates, she realized that her approach might be seen as outdated in this environment. During the initial equipment inspection, Master Chief David Rodriguez, the range supervisor, stopped at Sarah's rifle case. He lifted her grandfather's modified .338 Lapua Magnum with the careful respect of someone who understood craftsmanship. When he saw it, the weapon was a work of art, its stock worn smooth by decades of use, its action tuned to mechanical perfection by a man who had spent his entire life pursuing accuracy at extreme distances. "This is beautiful work," Rodriguez said quietly, running his fingers along the stock's grain. "Your grandfather's?" "Yes, Chief," Sarah replied. "He guided hunters in the Bob Marshall Wilderness for 40 years. Modified it himself for shots across mountain valleys." Rodriguez nodded appreciatively, but she could see several other candidates exchanging glances that suggested they viewed her rifle as a museum piece rather than a precision instrument. Marcus Kane's voice carried from where he was assembling his own weapon, a state-of-the-art platform loaded with electronic accessories. "Hope it can keep up with the 21st century. Grandma's gun might have trouble with the pace around here." The nickname stuck immediately. Within hours, Grandma Gun had evolved into just Grandma, and by the end of the first week, even some of the instructors were using it. Sarah endured the mockery with the same quiet dignity she'd shown her entire career, but she could feel the weight of every expectation pressing down on her. She was representing more than herself here. Every woman who had ever been told she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or tough enough for combat was watching through her, even if they didn't know it yet. The training regimen was brutal from day one. Candidates were awakened at 4:30 each morning for physical training that pushed even elite soldiers to their limits. The obstacle courses were designed to simulate the physical demands of special operations requiring upper body strength that Sarah had to work twice as hard to maintain. After PT came equipment maintenance, weapons familiarization, and then hours on the range practicing the rapid engagement techniques that were the program's specialty. Sarah struggled with the physical demands in ways that some of her male counterparts didn't. Carrying a 50-pound pack while maintaining shooting accuracy over long distances required a type of endurance that couldn't be faked or approximated. But she had advantages they didn't recognize. Years of hunting in Montana's backcountry had taught her how to move efficiently over rough terrain, how to find stable shooting positions in impossible circumstances, and most importantly, how to remain absolutely still for hours at a time while waiting for the perfect opportunity. Her shooting was consistently excellent, but it was also consistently slow by the program standards. While other candidates could engage multiple targets in rapid succession, Sarah took the time to ensure each shot was perfectly placed. Her targets showed groups that would have impressed any civilian shooter, tight clusters that demonstrated exceptional accuracy and consistency. But in the rapid-fire exercises that made up the bulk of the evaluation, she consistently finished in the bottom third of the class. Marcus Kane, meanwhile, was establishing himself as the program's golden boy. His scores were exceptional, his confidence boundless, and his ability to engage multiple targets quickly made him a favorite among the instructors. He had a natural talent for the aggressive style the program emphasized, and his background in Army Rangers gave him credibility that Sarah simply couldn't match. When Captain Harrison posted weekly rankings, Kane's name was always at the top, while Sarah's hovered near the bottom despite her superior accuracy. The pressure came to a head during the fourth week's qualification exercise. The test required candidates to engage 12 targets at varying distances from 200 to 800 meters, with a time limit of 6 minutes. It was designed to simulate the kind of rapid engagement scenario that special operations snipers might face in urban combat or close-quarters battle. Sarah loaded her grandfather's rifle, feeling the familiar comfort of its smooth bolt action, and tried to push away the knowledge that this test would likely determine her future in the program. The whistle blew, and around her, the other candidates began engaging targets with mechanical precision. The sound of rapid fire filled the air as semi-automatic platforms barked repeatedly, their operators moving smoothly from target to target. With practiced efficiency, Sarah worked methodically, taking the time to read wind conditions, adjust for distance, and ensure each shot was perfectly placed. Her bullets found their marks with surgical precision, each one dead center in the scoring zone. But methodical wasn't fast enough. When the final whistle sounded, Sarah was still engaging her 10th target. Her shot placement perfect, but her pace inadequate by the program's standards. She watched other candidates celebrating their completion times while she quietly packed her equipment, knowing what was coming. Captain Harrison's voice carried across the range as he announced the results. Outstanding scores from Kane, Thompson, and Rodriguez. Exceptional speed management and target engagement. When he reached Sarah's name, his tone carried the weight of disappointment. Mitchell, superior accuracy on completed targets, but failure to complete the full course of fire within time parameters. That's a program failure. The words hit like a physical blow, but Sarah maintained her composure as she had throughout the entire ordeal. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt it building like a storm on the horizon. But knowing didn't make it easier to accept. Around her, she could hear the whispers starting, the kind of cruel satisfaction that some people take in watching others fail. Marcus Kane's voice was particularly clear as he offered his analysis to anyone who would listen. Told you she couldn't hack it. This isn't a hobby shooting club, it's special operations. Maybe they'll send her back to writing traffic tickets. That evening, Sarah found an envelope on her bunk containing her reassignment orders. The language was clinical and bureaucratic, but the message was clear. Effective immediately, she was being transferred to Equipment Support Services under Master Chief Rodriguez. No appeals process, no second chances, just a polite dismissal typed on official letterhead. She sat on her bunk reading the orders. 12 years of law enforcement experience and a lifetime of preparation reduced to a single administrative decision. Marcus Kane appeared at her bunk with several other candidates, his expression a mockery of sympathy that made her stomach turn. "Hey, don't look so devastated," he said with fake concern dripping from every word. "At least now you can do what women are actually good at. Keep our equipment clean and maybe learn how real snipers operate." The laughter from his followers was like salt in an open wound, but Sarah folded her orders quietly and placed them in her shooting journal next to all her carefully compiled data. She would report to equipment support in the morning as ordered. But something inside her had hardened during this process. She might not be fast enough for their arbitrary time standards, but she knew something they didn't understand yet. Speed meant nothing if you missed the shot that mattered most. In the margins of her journal, she wrote a single line that would guide everything that came next. Patience beats panic when lives depend on it. The next morning, Sarah reported to Master Chief Rodriguez in the equipment building, a sprawling facility that housed everything from rifle maintenance to advanced ballistics computers. Rodriguez was a career Navy man who had spent more years maintaining precision weapons than most people spent in the military entirely. His weathered hands could diagnose a rifle problem by feel alone, and his reputation for keeping weapons operational in impossible conditions was legendary throughout the special operations community. "So you're the sniper washout," Rodriguez said without malice, studying her with the calculating gaze of someone who had seen plenty of disappointment in his career. "Heard you can shoot straight, just too methodical for the speed demons running the show upstairs." His assessment was accurate, but not unkind, and Sarah detected something in his voice that might have been respect. "Yes, Chief," she replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served her throughout her career, ready to serve wherever I'm needed. Rodriguez nodded slowly, seeming to weigh something in his mind before speaking again. "Well, Mitchell, maybe you'll learn something useful here that they don't teach in the regular program. These hotshot candidates think their fancy rifles are magic wands, but they don't understand the first thing about what makes precision shooting actually work." As Sarah began learning the intricacies of maintaining the advanced weapon systems used throughout the special operations community, she discovered that her new position offered something invaluable that she hadn't expected: access to detailed performance records for every weapon system on the base, including classified data about how different rifles and ammunition combinations performed under various conditions. More importantly, she had access to the real-world performance data from graduates who had gone on to actual combat deployments. What she found in those records would change everything. But first, she had to survive being the woman who everyone had already written off as not tough enough to matter. The equipment support building was about to become her classroom in ways that the formal training program never could have been, and her education in the reality behind the military's confidence was just beginning. The equipment support facility became Sarah's new world, a place where the glamorous facade of special operations gave way to the mechanical reality of what actually made elite soldiers effective. Master Chief Rodriguez ran his domain with quiet efficiency, maintaining weapon systems that most people would never know existed. The building hummed with the constant activity of weapons being cleaned, calibrated, and modified for specific missions that were planned in rooms Sarah would never see. Within her first week, Sarah discovered that her new position offered insights that no classroom could provide. Every rifle that came through for maintenance told a story about its user's capabilities and limitations. She could read the wear patterns on barrels, identify stress fractures in stocks, and diagnose accuracy problems that their owners never recognized. More importantly, she had access to the computerized ballistics database that tracked every shot fired on the base's ranges, cross-referenced with environmental conditions, ammunition specifications, and shooter performance data. The revelation came gradually as she began to understand what the data actually revealed. Marcus Kane's rifle showed consistent wear patterns that suggested he was over-torquing his scope mounts, causing minute shifts in zero that would compound at extreme distances. Another top candidate's weapon had trigger problems that made his shots pull slightly left under rapid-fire conditions. These were subtle issues that wouldn't affect performance on the standardized qualification courses, but they would prove catastrophic in real-world scenarios where precision mattered more than speed. Rodriguez noticed her attention to detail during her second week in the facility. "You're seeing something the regular instructors miss, aren't you?" he asked while watching her examine a rifle that had come in for routine maintenance. Sarah looked up from the weapon, choosing her words carefully. "Chief, some of these rifles have problems that could affect accuracy at extreme range. The kind of distances where special operations snipers might actually have to shoot." The Master Chief nodded grimly, his expression suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd encountered this issue. The training program focuses on close-range rapid engagement because that's what looks impressive to visiting brass. But real special operations work often requires shots at distances where those rapid-fire skills don't matter. What matters is being able to make one perfect shot when everything depends on it. Rodriguez pulled up the classified performance database on his secure terminal, revealing data that painted a troubling picture of the program's actual effectiveness. Sarah studied the screens with growing understanding, seeing patterns that confirmed her worst suspicions about the training philosophy. Graduates who excelled in the speed-focused program showed consistent accuracy degradation at distances beyond 600 meters. Under stress simulation, their precision dropped dramatically as they reverted to the rapid-fire techniques they'd been trained to prioritize. "Chief," Sarah said carefully, "some of these candidates are going to fail when it matters. Most. Their training is optimizing them for artificial range conditions, not real combat scenarios." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her with the expression of someone who had been waiting years for someone else to recognize what he'd been seeing. "I've been trying to tell the program leadership that for 3 years, Mitchell. But speed sells to Pentagon reviewers. Quick engagement times and impressive demonstration scores get funding. Nobody wants to hear about the nuances of long-range precision." That evening, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Using her access to the maintenance database and performance records, she began compiling a comprehensive analysis of the training program's actual effectiveness. She worked late into the night, cross-referencing weapon performance data with shooter records, environmental conditions, and historical combat reports from previous graduates who had deployed to active theaters. What she discovered was deeply troubling. The program was producing snipers who performed exceptionally well in controlled environments, but struggled when faced with the variable conditions and extreme distances that characterized real special operations missions. Several graduates had failed critical shots during actual deployments, missing opportunities that could have prevented casualties or compromised entire operations. The emphasis on speed was creating muscle memory that prioritized rapid engagement over careful shot placement, exactly the opposite of what was needed for precision shooting at extreme range. Sarah documented everything meticulously, creating detailed charts that showed the correlation between training methods and real-world performance. Her analysis revealed that the most successful special operations snipers were those who had somehow retained their ability to slow down and take careful shots despite their rapid-fire training. The data suggested that the program's core philosophy was fundamentally flawed, optimizing for metrics that didn't translate to combat effectiveness. The complexity of compiling this information while maintaining her regular duties meant Sarah was working 16-hour days, but she felt driven by a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since joining the program. This wasn't about vindicating her own failure anymore. It was about preventing future failures that could cost lives in situations where there were no second chances. Rodriguez began providing her with additional access to historical records, including classified after-action reports from special operations missions where sniper support had been critical. These documents revealed the stark reality behind the program's confidence. Multiple missions had failed or nearly failed because graduates couldn't adapt their rapid-fire training to scenarios requiring patience and precision. One report described a hostage rescue operation that had been compromised when a sniper missed a 800-meter shot because he rushed the engagement, alerting guards who then executed 2 hostages before the assault team could intervene. The psychological profile of successful long-range snipers. According to the classified research Sarah was now accessing, emphasized patience, emotional regulation, and the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure for extended periods. These traits were rarely measured in the current program, which valued quick decision-making and aggressive engagement over contemplative precision. The disconnect between training and reality was so significant that Sarah began to wonder how the program had maintained its reputation for excellence. Her investigation expanded to include maintenance records from deployed units, revealing equipment failures that could have been prevented with different training approaches. Rifles that had been maintained according to rapid-fire protocols showed accelerated wear when used for precision shooting at extreme distances. Scopes that were zeroed for quick engagement often failed to maintain accuracy during the thermal cycling that occurred during long-duration missions in desert environments. Rodriguez watched her work with growing respect, occasionally providing guidance or additional access to records that supported her analysis. "You're building something that could change how the entire special operations community approaches sniper training," he told her during one of their late-night sessions in the equipment facility. "But you need to understand that challenging the current system means challenging careers that were built on promoting these methods." The scope of the problem became clear when Sarah accessed deployment records from the past 5 years. Graduates from the Fort Braxton program were failing at critical moments with disturbing regularity, but these failures were being classified as intelligence problems or equipment malfunctions rather than training deficiencies. The institutional momentum behind the speed-focused approach was so strong that contradictory evidence was being explained away rather than addressed. Sarah's most significant breakthrough came when she discovered historical records from earlier versions of the program, before the emphasis on rapid engagement had been adopted. Snipers trained under the older methodology, which emphasized patience and precision over speed, had significantly better real-world performance records. Their success rates in actual combat situations were nearly double those of recent graduates, and their equipment showed less wear from improper use. The data painted a clear picture of institutional drift, where training methods had evolved to optimize for measurable metrics rather than combat effectiveness. The current program could produce impressive demonstration scores and rapid qualification times, but it was failing to develop the fundamental skills that made snipers effective in real-world scenarios. Sarah realized she was documenting not just individual failures, but a systemic problem that was affecting the entire special operations community. As her analysis neared completion, Sarah faced a critical decision about how to present her findings. The data clearly showed that the program's current methods were producing graduates who weren't prepared for the realities of special operations missions, but challenging the institutional orthodoxy would require more courage than she'd ever displayed. She was a washout from the program, a woman who had been dismissed for being too slow, and her credibility with the leadership was essentially non-existent. Rodriguez provided the perspective she needed during one of their final late-night sessions. "Mitchell, you've documented something that career officers have been ignoring for years, because it's easier to maintain the status quo than admit they've been wrong. But you have something they don't have anymore. You have the luxury of being right without worrying about protecting your reputation." The Master Chief pulled up a secure communication terminal and showed her something that would change everything. "There's someone who needs to see your analysis, but it means going outside the normal chain of command. Colonel Rebecca Stone has Been asking questions about sniper training effectiveness for months, but she hasn't had the data to support her concerns. Your work could give her what she needs to force changes that should have happened years ago. Sarah stared at the screen, understanding that sending her analysis to Colonel Stone would cross a line that could end her military career entirely. She would be going over Captain Harrison's head, challenging the program that had rejected her, and potentially embarrassing officers whose careers were built on promoting the current methods. But she also knew that remaining silent would mean watching more graduates fail when lives depended on their skills. The weight of every documented failure pressed down on her as she considered her options. Hostages who had died because snipers couldn't adapt their training to real-world scenarios. Missions that had been compromised because graduates prioritized speed over accuracy when precision was what mattered most. Equipment that had failed because operators didn't understand the mechanical realities of extreme-range shooting. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory from countless hunting trips in the Montana wilderness. Sage, he'd told her, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. Sometimes the hardest thing about taking a shot isn't making it accurate. It's having the patience to wait for the right moment and the courage to take it when that moment comes. Sarah realized that this was her moment. Not the dramatic combat scenario she'd imagined when she first arrived at Fort Braxton, but something potentially more important. A chance to prevent failures that hadn't happened yet, to protect soldiers she'd never meet, and to ensure that the next generation of special operations snipers would be trained for reality rather than impressive demonstrations. She drafted a message to Colonel Stone, attaching her complete analysis and requesting a meeting to discuss her findings. The data spoke for itself, but she included a summary that emphasized the potential consequences of maintaining the current training philosophy. As she prepared to send the message, Sarah understood that she was about to find out whether the military was more interested in protecting its institutional pride or improving its actual effectiveness. The cursor hovered over the send button as Sarah considered the implications of what she was about to do. Rodriguez watched from across the room, his expression conveying both support and understanding of the risk she was taking. "You know, there's no going back once you send that," he said quietly. "But there's also no going forward if you don't." Sarah clicked send, committing herself to a course of action that would either vindicate everything she believed about precision shooting or confirm that the military wasn't ready to hear uncomfortable truths about its methods. Within hours, she would discover that her analysis had reached someone who had been waiting for exactly the kind of evidence she'd compiled, and that the institutional resistance to change she feared was about to meet an unstoppable force in the form of a colonel who valued effectiveness over appearances. The equipment support facility suddenly felt different as Sarah realized her time in the shadows was about to end. Whether that emergence would lead to vindication or further disgrace remained to be seen, but she had finally taken the shot that mattered most. Not with her grandfather's rifle, but with data and documentation that could potentially save lives she would never know about in situations she would never see. The transformation from rejected candidate to potential program reformer had begun, but Sarah understood that the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. Convincing the leadership to change methods that had been institutionalized for years would require more than data. It would require the kind of courage that couldn't be taught in any training program, and Sarah was about to discover whether she possessed it, when everything depended on her willingness to stand by her convictions. Colonel Rebecca Stone arrived at Fort Braxton on a Tuesday morning that would change everything Sarah thought she knew about military politics and institutional change. The base had been buzzing with unusual activity since dawn, with additional security personnel at checkpoints and a steady stream of black SUVs arriving at the command center. Sarah watched from the equipment facility window as uniformed figures she didn't recognize moved with the purposeful urgency that always accompanied high-level visits. Rodriguez appeared at her workstation with an expression she'd never seen before, somewhere between excitement and apprehension. "Mitchell, you need to clean up and report to Colonel Stone's temporary office in Building 3 immediately. And bring everything. Your analysis, your documentation, all of it." The gravity in his voice made it clear that this wasn't a routine meeting, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten with the realization that her message had not only been received, but had triggered something much larger than she'd anticipated. As Sarah gathered her files and secured her grandfather's rifle in its case, Rodriguez provided context that made the situation even more significant. "Stone isn't just any Colonel, Mitchell. She's the Pentagon's point person for special operations, effectiveness, and she's been conducting a comprehensive review of training programs across all branches. Your analysis arrived at exactly the moment she needed evidence to support concerns she's been developing for months." The temporary office in Building 3 had been hastily arranged, but felt more like a war room than a meeting space. Maps covered the walls, showing deployment locations where special operations forces were currently active. Computer terminals displayed data streams that Sarah couldn't identify but that clearly related to ongoing missions around the world. Colonel Stone herself was smaller than Sarah had expected, but she radiated the kind of quiet authority that made her presence felt throughout the room. "Specialist Mitchell," Stone said without preamble, "your analysis of the precision marksman course has raised some serious questions about how we're preparing snipers for actual combat scenarios. I need you to walk me through your findings, and I need you to be completely honest about what you've discovered, regardless of how it might reflect on the program or its leadership." Sarah opened her documentation, spreading charts and performance data across the conference table with hands that she forced to remain steady. The Colonel's attention was complete and focused as Sarah began explaining her methodology, starting with the maintenance records that had first revealed the disconnect between training and reality. Each piece of evidence built on the previous. 1. Creating a comprehensive picture of systematic problems that had been developing for years. "The core issue," Sarah explained, pointing to a chart that showed accuracy degradation patterns, "is that the current training creates muscle memory, optimized for rapid engagement at close to medium ranges. But special operations missions increasingly require precision shots at extreme distances, often under conditions that punish rush decision-making." She pulled up deployment records that showed mission failures directly attributable to sniper performance problems. These aren't equipment failures or intelligence problems. These are training failures. Colonel Stone studied the data with the intensity of someone who understood its implications, not just theoretically, but in terms of real soldiers in real danger. "How confident are you in this analysis, Mitchell? Because if you're right, we're sending people into combat with training that's actively counterproductive for the missions they're being asked to perform." "Ma'am, the data is conclusive," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength as she moved deeper into her area of expertise. "Graduates who excel in the current program show consistent problems when faced with shots requiring patience and precision. The emphasis on speed is creating habits that work against the fundamental requirements of long-range accuracy." The Colonel's next question caught Sarah off guard with its directness. "You were dismissed from this program for being too slow. Some people might say this analysis is just sour grapes from someone who couldn't meet the standards. How do I know this isn't just an elaborate justification for your own failure?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah realized this was the moment that would define not just her credibility, but potentially the future of sniper training throughout the military. She could feel the weight of every dismissive comment, every mocking nickname, every assumption about her capabilities pressing down on her. But she also felt the clarity that came from knowing she was absolutely right about something that mattered more than her own reputation. "Ma'am, you're correct that I failed the program standards," Sarah said, meeting the Colonel's gaze directly. "But my failure was in adapting to training methods that are fundamentally flawed. The same methodical approach that made me too slow for qualification is exactly what's needed for the kind of precision shooting that special operations actually requires. My grandfather taught me that rushing the shot you're not ready to take is worse than not taking it at all. Colonel Stone leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with renewed interest. Tell me about your grandfather's approach. I want to understand the methodology you're advocating for. Sarah opened her shooting journal, its worn pages filled with decades of accumulated wisdom about long-range accuracy. He guided hunters in the Bob Marshall Wilderness for 40 years, making shots across mountain valleys, where wind conditions could change between heartbeats and a missed shot meant the difference between success and failure. He taught me that speed is meaningless if you miss, and that the most important skill a shooter can develop is the patience to wait for the perfect moment. The colonel examined the journal's hand-drawn wind charts and ballistic calculations, clearly impressed by the depth and sophistication of the analysis. This is graduate-level ballistics work, Mitchell. Where did you learn to do calculations at this level? Necessity, ma'am, Sarah replied. Hunting elk at 800 yards in mountain conditions requires understanding every variable that affects bullet flight. My grandfather didn't have computer programs or electronic wind meters. He had to read the environment directly and make calculations that accounted for factors most people never consider. Stone nodded slowly, then pulled up a classified file on her secure terminal. Mitchell, I'm going to show you something that will stay in this room. 3 weeks ago, a Delta Force team nearly lost an entire hostage rescue operation because their sniper couldn't adapt to a precision shot that required patience rather than speed. The target was an 850-yard shot through a window opening barely 18 inches wide, with civilian hostages positioned inches away from the terrorist. Our sniper had multiple opportunities over a 2-hour period, but he kept trying to rush the shot instead of waiting for the perfect moment. Sarah studied the mission report with growing understanding of why her analysis had generated such immediate attention. What happened, ma'am? The sniper eventually took a shot that missed by 3 inches, alerting the terrorist who executed one hostage before the assault team could breach the building. The mission succeeded in saving the other hostages, but it was classified as a partial failure due to the sniper's performance. Stone closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. That sniper was Marcus Kane, the golden boy of your training program. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it also confirmed everything she'd suspected about the program's fundamental problems. Marcus Kane, with all his confidence and rapid-fire skills, had failed when it mattered most because he couldn't adapt his training to a scenario that required patience and precision. Ma'am, that's exactly the kind of failure my analysis predicts. The current training creates shooters who can't slow down when the situation demands it. Colonel Stone stood and walked to the wall map, pointing to several locations marked with classified designations. We have special operations teams deployed in environments where precision shooting at extreme range is becoming increasingly important. Urban environments with complex backgrounds, desert conditions where mirage affects accuracy, mountain regions where wind patterns are unpredictable. The old rapid-fire training isn't preparing them for these realities. The colonel returned to her seat and opened another file that made Sarah's breath catch. It contained performance evaluations from her entire law enforcement career, including detailed records of shots she'd made during critical incidents. Your record as a police sniper is exceptional, Mitchell. 17 critical incidents over 12 years with a perfect record of accurate shot placement and 0 civilian casualties. That's not luck. That's exactly the kind of precision mindset we need to be developing. Sarah realized that this meeting was about much more than validating her analysis. Colonel Stone was evaluating her not just as a researcher, but as a potential solution to the problems she'd identified. Ma'am, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not sure what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that the person who identified the problem might be exactly the person we need to fix it, Stone replied. I'm authorized to implement immediate Changes to training programs that show evidence of systematic failures. Your analysis provides that evidence, but implementing effective changes requires someone who understands both the problems and the solutions. The scope of what the colonel was proposing began to sink in as Sarah realized she was being offered an opportunity that she'd never imagined possible. Not just vindication for her own failure, but a chance to reshape how the entire special operations community approached sniper training. The woman who had been dismissed as too slow and methodical was being asked to redesign the system that had rejected her. "Ma'am, the current program leadership isn't going to welcome changes, especially coming from someone they've already written off as inadequate," Sarah said, voicing the practical concerns that her excitement couldn't overcome. "Captain Harrison and the other instructors have built their careers on the current methods." Colonel Stone's expression hardened with the kind of determination that had probably gotten her to her current position despite the barriers facing women in the military. "Let me worry about the institutional resistance, Mitchell. I have authority from the Pentagon to implement changes based on performance data, and your analysis provides exactly the justification I need. The question is whether you're willing to put yourself back in the spotlight to make this happen." Sarah thought about Marcus Kane's failure in the field, about the hostage who had died because a sniper couldn't adapt his training to reality, about all the future failures that her analysis predicted if nothing changed. The personal risk to her own career seemed insignificant compared to the potential consequences of maintaining the status quo. "Yes, ma'am, I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to fix these problems." The colonel smiled for the first time since Sarah had entered the room, and it transformed her entire demeanor from intimidating authority figure to collaborative partner. "Excellent. Because I'm about to turn Fort Braxton upside down, and I'm going to need someone who understands precision shooting from the ground up to help me rebuild it correctly." Stone pulled up an organizational chart on her terminal, showing the command structure that governs special operations training throughout the military. "I'm implementing what we're calling the Enhanced Precision Protocol, effective immediately. You'll be reinstated as a training candidate, but you'll also be working directly with me to develop new curriculum standards that emphasize adaptive marksmanship rather than just rapid engagement." The magnitude of the change Stone was proposing became clear as she outlined the scope of the transformation. New evaluation criteria that measured precision under stress rather than just speed. Modified equipment standards that prioritized accuracy over rapid-fire capability. Training scenarios that required patience and environmental reading rather than quick decision-making. Most importantly, a fundamental shift in philosophy that recognized precision as the foundation of all effective marksmanship. "The program will resist these changes," Stone continued, "but they won't have a choice. I have data from 18 months of mission analysis showing that current training methods are producing inadequate results in real-world scenarios. Your analysis provides the scientific foundation for what battlefield commanders have been reporting for years." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension as she realized that her careful documentation was about to become the foundation for sweeping institutional change. "Ma'am, implementing these changes will require complete retraining for current instructors. Some of them have been teaching rapid-fire methods for decades, which is exactly why I need someone with your background to help design the new curriculum," Stone replied. "You understand both the technical requirements of precision shooting and the institutional barriers that prevent effective training. Most importantly, you've demonstrated the patience and attention to detail that we need to be developing in our snipers." The colonel's secure communication device chimed with an incoming message, and her expression became even more serious as she read the contents. "Mitchell, I'm about to share something with you that's going to change how you think about the urgency of these reforms. We have a developing situation that's going to test everything we've been discussing, and the timeline for implementation just became much more compressed." Stone pulled up a classified operational briefing that showed a map of what appeared to be a Middle Eastern desert region, with tactical symbols indicating friendly and enemy positions. Operation Sandstorm is a joint task force mission involving Delta Force, and intelligence suggests they're going to need sniper support for a precision shot that's beyond the capabilities of rapid-fire trained operators. Sarah studied the tactical display, recognizing the kind of extreme-range scenario that her analysis had identified as particularly problematic for current graduates. "Ma'am, what kind of shot are we talking about?" "Potentially the most difficult precision shot ever attempted in combat conditions," Stone replied, her voice carrying the weight of lives hanging in the balance. "A shot that will require exactly the kind of patience and environmental reading that the current program doesn't develop. A shot that someone trained in your grandfather's methods might be able to make, but that rapid-fire specialists almost certainly cannot." The implications of what Colonel Stone was suggesting began to crystallize in Sarah's mind as she realized that her opportunity for vindication might come not through gradual program reform, but through a single shot that would demonstrate the value of precision over speed in the most dramatic way possible. The theoretical had suddenly become immediate, and Sarah was about to discover whether her convictions about marksmanship could translate to the ultimate test of combat effectiveness. Operation Sandstorm erupted into chaos at 0347 hours local time when Delta Force Team Alpha breached what intelligence had identified as a terrorist command center in the Kinmal province. What they found instead was a carefully orchestrated ambush that pinned 12 of America's most elite soldiers in a valley with no cover and no viable extraction routes. The mission that was supposed to last 4 hours had stretched into its second day, and the situation was deteriorating by the hour. Sarah Mitchell found herself in the operations center at Fort Braxton, watching real-time satellite feeds that showed the desperate situation unfolding half a world away. Colonel Stone had summoned her when the crisis developed, explaining that the precision shot they'd discussed was no longer theoretical, but immediate and critical. Major Alex Thompson, Calcine Ghost, was leading the trapped Delta Force team, and conventional rescue options had been exhausted. The only remaining possibility was a shot that defied every assumption about what was militarily feasible. The tactical situation was a nightmare of overlapping challenges that would have been impossible to simulate in any training environment. Ghost's team was trapped in a narrow valley surrounded by elevated positions held by enemy fighters with heavy weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Air support couldn't penetrate the valley due to the terrain and surface-to-air missile threats, and ground reinforcements were at least 18 hours away through hostile territory. Most critically, the team's communications had been damaged, leaving them unable to coordinate with overhead support aircraft. Colonel Stone pulled up the most recent reconnaissance images, pointing to the one asset that might change the equation. "There's an F-22 Raptor conducting high-altitude reconnaissance over the area, but the pilot has been unconscious for the past 6 hours after taking shrapnel from an enemy missile that damaged his cockpit systems. The aircraft is maintaining altitude on autopilot, but the pilot needs to be awakened to provide close air support that could break the siege." Sarah studied the tactical display, understanding immediately why conventional solutions had failed. "Ma'am, how do you wake up an unconscious pilot in a supersonic aircraft flying at 30,000 feet?" The question seemed absurd even as she asked it, but she could see from Colonel Stone's expression that there was an answer, and it involved exactly the kind of impossible precision shot that had brought her to the colonel's attention. "The pilot's unconscious but not critically injured," Stone explained, pulling up medical telemetry from the aircraft. "The shrapnel caused a concussion, but he's physically capable of regaining consciousness and controlling the aircraft if he receives sufficient stimulus. The problem is delivering that stimulus from ground level to a pilot sealed inside one of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built." The solution that Stone outlined was so audacious that Sarah initially assumed it was some kind of test of her technical knowledge. A precision shot from ground level to the F-22's cockpit, using a specially modified projectile that would penetrate the aircraft's canopy without causing catastrophic decompression or structural damage. The shot would need to be accurate enough to impact the pilot's helmet with sufficient force to cause awakening but not injury, delivered across a distance that exceeded any successful sniper shot in military history. "Ma'am, you're talking about a 2-mile shot at a moving target flying at 400 knots, Sarah said, running calculations in her head that seemed to defy physics. The lead time alone would require predicting the aircraft's position with accuracy measured in inches, and that's assuming perfect environmental conditions and equipment performance. Stone nodded grimly, acknowledging the impossibility of what she was proposing. The shot has been analyzed by our best ballistics experts, and they've concluded it cannot be made with current equipment and training methods. Every sniper we've consulted has declined to attempt it, saying the variables are too complex and the consequences of failure too severe. But your analysis suggests someone trained in patience and environmental reading might approach the problem differently." Sarah realized that this was the ultimate test of everything she'd argued about: precision versus speed, methodical analysis versus rapid decision-making. The shot would require not just exceptional marksmanship, but the kind of holistic understanding of ballistics, meteorology, and aircraft dynamics that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Most importantly, it would require the patience to wait for the perfect convergence of conditions that might occur only once in the hours available before the Delta Force team was overrun. "Ma'am, I need to understand the full scope of what you're asking," Sarah said, feeling the weight of 12 lives pressing down on her decision. "If I miss this shot, or if the impact causes uncontrolled aircraft damage, we lose both the pilot and any possibility of air support for the ground team. If I don't take the shot, the team is almost certainly going to be overrun within the next few hours." Colonel Stone pulled up the most current intelligence estimates, showing enemy reinforcements moving toward the valley from multiple directions. Ghost's team has enough ammunition for maybe 6 more hours of defensive fire. After that, they'll be forced into close combat against overwhelming odds. The F-22 pilot is literally their only hope of survival, but he might as well be on the moon for all the good he's doing them unconscious. The technical requirements for the shot were staggering in their complexity. Sarah would need to calculate the flight path of a custom projectile over 2 miles of variable atmospheric conditions, accounting for wind that changed direction and velocity at different altitudes. The target was moving at speeds that required predicting its position several seconds into the future, and the impact needed to be precise enough to awaken the pilot without causing injury that would prevent him from controlling the aircraft. Most challenging of all, the shot would need to be taken from a position that provided line of sight to the aircraft while remaining concealed from enemy observation. Intelligence had identified a mountain peak approximately 2-3 miles from the valley where the Delta Force team was trapped, but reaching that position would require a dangerous infiltration through territory that might be under enemy surveillance. "Ma'am, even if the shot is technically possible, getting into position to take it might be the greater challenge," Sarah observed, studying the topographical maps that showed the route to the mountain peak. "That's a 12-hour climb through terrain that offers limited concealment and multiple opportunities for enemy observation." Stone had already anticipated this concern, revealing that a special operations team was standing by to provide infiltration support and security for the mission. "You won't be going alone, Mitchell. We have assets in the region that can get you into position and provide overwatch while you take the shot. But the marksmanship component is entirely your responsibility." Sarah felt the familiar calm settling over her that had always preceded her most difficult shots, the same mental state she'd experienced during critical incidents as a police sniper. The external pressure and complexity faded into background noise as her mind began working through the technical requirements with the methodical precision her grandfather had taught her decades earlier in the Montana wilderness. The weapon system for the shot had been specially configured by Rodriguez and his team, using Sarah's grandfather's .338 Lapua Magnum as the foundation, but incorporating advanced ballistics computers and environmental sensors that could provide real-time data about conditions along the entire flight path. The projectile itself was a marvel of engineering, designed to penetrate the F-22's canopy while delivering precisely the right amount of kinetic energy to awaken the pilot without causing serious injury. The shot will require integration of more variables than any sniper has ever attempted, Rodriguez explained as he walked Sarah through the weapon system's capabilities. Wind speed and direction at 6 different altitude bands, atmospheric pressure variations, the aircraft's exact speed and heading, thermal effects on the projectile, even the rotation of the Earth over the flight time. The computer can provide data, but interpreting it into an accurate firing solution is going to require the kind of intuitive understanding that can't be programmed. Sarah spent the next 4 hours studying every aspect of the technical challenge, from the ballistics calculations to the aircraft's flight characteristics to the meteorological conditions in the target area. But she also spent time with her grandfather's shooting journal, reviewing the fundamental principles of extreme-range accuracy that no computer could replicate. The shot would ultimately depend on the same patience and environmental awareness that had guided hunters across mountain valleys for generations. The infiltration to the shooting position began at midnight, with Sarah and a 4-man special operations team moving through terrain that seemed designed to frustrate human movement. The mountain peak that offered line of sight to the aircraft was accessible only through a series of narrow ridges and exposed slopes that provided minimal concealment from observation. Every step had to be planned carefully to avoid creating visual signatures that enemy spotters might detect. Sarah carried her grandfather's modified rifle in a specially designed case that protected the weapon's zero, while allowing rapid deployment once she reached the shooting position. The additional equipment required for the shot, including environmental sensors and ballistics computers, added 40 pounds to her load, but she moved through the darkness with the steady pace of someone accustomed to long-distance movement in challenging terrain. The climb took 11 hours, with the team moving in short bounds between concealed positions, constantly aware that enemy forces might be monitoring the approaches to high ground around the valley. Sarah used the movement time to continue studying the environmental conditions, noting how wind patterns changed with altitude and how thermal effects from the desert floor created atmospheric disturbances that would affect projectile flight. When they finally reached the shooting position, Sarah had less than 30 minutes to prepare for a shot that would either save 12 lives or confirm every doubt anyone had ever expressed about her capabilities. The F-22 was maintaining a precise orbit pattern at 32,000 feet, its unconscious pilot trapped in a cycle of automated flight that would continue until fuel exhaustion forced an emergency landing in enemy territory. Sarah established her shooting position with the methodical care her grandfather had taught her, using natural features of the mountain peak to create the most stable platform possible. The weapon system's environmental sensors began feeding data about atmospheric conditions along the projected flight path, revealing the complex pattern of thermal layers and wind variations that would affect the projectile during its 4-second flight time. The first challenge was timing the shot to intersect the aircraft's orbit at the precise moment when all environmental conditions aligned for maximum accuracy. Sarah spent 20 minutes studying the F-22's flight pattern, noting minute variations in speed and altitude that the pilot's unconscious movements were causing. The aircraft wasn't flying a perfect circle, but rather a complex orbital pattern that required predicting exactly where it would be at the moment of impact. Through her scope, Sarah could see the aircraft as a distant speck against the desert sky, its contrails marking the endless circle it had been flying for hours. Somewhere inside that technological marvel, an unconscious pilot represented the only hope for the soldiers trapped in the valley below. The shot she was about to attempt would either awaken him to provide the air support that could break the siege, or it would add another failure to the list of missions that speed-focused training had been unable to accomplish. Sarah chambered the specially designed projectile, feeling the familiar comfort of her grandfather's rifle action cycling smoothly despite the modifications that had been made to accommodate the advanced ballistic system. The weapon felt like an extension of her own body, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. But this shot would test every skill she'd ever developed and demand precision that exceeded anything she'd ever attempted. The environmental data streaming into her scope painted a complex picture of atmospheric conditions that changed constantly as thermal currents rose from the desert floor and interacted with high-altitude wind patterns. Sarah integrated this information with her intuitive understanding of how air movement affected projectile flight, creating a firing solution that balanced computer calculations with the kind of environmental awareness that couldn't be taught in any classroom. At 13:47 hours local time, all the variables aligned for the few seconds that would determine the outcome of Operation Sandstorm. Sarah's breathing slowed to match her heartbeat as she acquired the target through her scope, the F-22 appearing as a sharp silhouette against the desert sky. Her finger moved to the trigger with the same deliberate precision she'd used for every critical shot of her career, knowing that the next few seconds would either vindicate everything she believed about marksmanship or prove that some challenges were simply beyond human capability. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil driving back against Sarah's shoulder as the projectile began its journey across 2 miles of desert air toward a target moving at 400 knots. For 4 eternal seconds, the fate of 12 Delta Force operators, 1 F-22 pilot, and Sarah's own career hung suspended in the air above the Camel province. The impact was barely visible through the scope, a tiny flash against the aircraft's canopy that seemed insignificant compared to the magnitude of what it represented. For a moment, nothing changed. The F-22 continued its orbital pattern, showing no signs that anything had occurred. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the shot might have failed to achieve its intended effect. Then the aircraft's flight pattern changed. The unconscious pilot, awakened by the precisely calculated impact against his helmet, began responding to his radio and taking manual control of his aircraft. Within minutes, the F-22 was diving toward the valley where Ghost's team was trapped, its weapons systems coming online to provide the close air support that would turn the tide of the battle. The rescue operation that followed became a textbook example of precision air support, with the awakened pilot delivering ordnance that eliminated enemy positions while avoiding any harm to the trapped Delta Force team. Ghost's team was extracted safely, their mission classified as a complete success, despite the complications that had nearly led to disaster. Sarah's shot was immediately classified at the highest levels, but word of its technical achievement spread through the special operations community like wildfire. The woman who had been dismissed from sniper school for being too slow had just completed the most difficult precision shot in military history, saving 12 lives and demonstrating the value of methodical marksmanship in the most dramatic way possible. Colonel Stone's transformation of the sniper training program moved forward with unprecedented speed, using Sarah's success as proof that precision-focused methods could achieve results that rapid-fire training never could. Marcus Kane and several other former Golden Boys requested to repeat the program under the new curriculum, acknowledging that their previous training had been fundamentally inadequate for real-world challenges. Sarah found herself not just vindicated, but elevated to a position she'd never imagined possible. The enhanced precision protocol became the new standard for sniper training throughout the military, with her grandfather's journal serving as the Foundation for curriculum that emphasized patience, environmental awareness, and the discipline to wait for the perfect shot rather than taking the first available one. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the same range where her dreams had seemingly ended, but now she was there as the chief instructor for the redesigned program. The motto on the wall had been changed from fast, accurate, deadly to patient, precise, decisive, reflecting the fundamental shift in philosophy that her analysis and ultimate success had made possible. The woman they'd called Grandma Gun and dismissed as too slow for modern warfare had become the architect of a revolution in military marksmanship training. Her impossible shot had not only saved 12 lives, but had proven that sometimes the most important victories come not from moving faster but from having the courage to slow down when everything depends on being absolutely right. The transformation of Fort Braxton began at dawn the morning after Sarah's impossible shot reached the Pentagon briefing rooms. General Patricia Hayes, the 4-star architect of modern special operations doctrine, arrived unannounced with a convoy that included ballistics experts, training psychologists, and enough brass to completely restructure the military's approach to precision marksmanship. The shot that had awakened an unconscious F-22 pilot and saved 12 Delta Force operators had accomplished something that years of academic debate could never achieve. It had provided undeniable proof that methodical precision could surpass rapid-fire techniques when lives hung in the balance. Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity that would have overwhelmed her just months earlier. The woman who had been relegated to equipment maintenance was now consulting with Pentagon officials about rewriting training doctrine that had been considered gospel for over a decade. Her grandfather's worn shooting journal, once mocked as outdated methodology, was being studied by military analysts who were discovering wisdom that computer algorithms had failed to capture. General Hayes wasted no time in dismantling the institutional resistance that had protected the speed-focused training program. Captain Harrison, who had dismissed Sarah as inadequate for modern warfare, found himself reassigned to a desk position where his rapid-fire expertise would have no influence over future training. The instructors who had perpetuated the myth that faster always meant better were given a choice between retraining under the new curriculum or finding new assignments outside the special operations community. The scope of the changes being implemented went far beyond Fort Braxton. Sarah's analysis had revealed systematic problems throughout the military's sniper training programs, and General Hayes was using her success to justify reforms that would affect thousands of future operators. The enhanced precision protocol wasn't just replacing one training method with another. It was fundamentally changing how the military thought about marksmanship, patience, and the qualities that made someone effective in life or death situations. Marcus Kane's reaction to the transformation was perhaps the most telling indication of how completely the old order had been overturned. The man who had confidently mocked Sarah's methodical approach requested a private meeting where he acknowledged that his failure during the hostage rescue operation had taught him more about marksmanship than all his previous training combined. His confidence had been replaced by humility, and his aggressive swagger had given way to the kind of careful observation that characterized truly skilled shooters. "Mitchell," Kane said during their conversation, using her surname for the first time without mockery, "I need to understand how you saw what I missed. When I was positioned for that hostage rescue shot, I had multiple opportunities over 2 hours, but I kept trying to force the moment instead of waiting for it to develop naturally. How did you learn the patience that I never developed?" Sarah recognized in Kane's question the same hunger for understanding that had driven her grandfather to spend decades perfecting his craft in the Montana wilderness. "Marcus, the difference isn't talent or natural ability. It's understanding that the hardest part of any critical shot isn't the marksmanship mechanics. It's having the discipline to wait until all the variables align perfectly, even when external pressure is demanding immediate action." The conversation represented a fundamental shift in how elite soldiers thought about their craft. Kane had been trained to believe that hesitation was weakness, and that aggressive action was always preferable to careful deliberation. Sarah's success had demonstrated that the most aggressive action sometimes involved the patience to wait for the perfect moment, even when that patience appeared to others as inaction or indecision. Rodriguez emerged as one of the most valuable allies in implementing the new training philosophy. His decades of maintaining precision weapons had given him insights into the mechanical realities of extreme-range shooting that most instructors lacked. Working alongside Sarah, he developed equipment protocols that emphasized reliability and accuracy over rapid-fire capability, ensuring that future snipers would have tools optimized for precision rather than impressive demonstration. Scores. The Master Chief's contribution went beyond equipment specifications. His understanding of how weapons performed under different environmental conditions became the foundation for training scenarios that prepared students for the variable conditions they would face in actual combat. Instead of sterile range exercises conducted in perfect weather, the new program exposed candidates to wind, heat, cold, and atmospheric disturbances that would affect their shooting in real-world situations. Colonel Stone's role in the transformation extended far beyond Fort Braxton. Using her Pentagon connections and Sarah's documented success, she was building a coalition of reform-minded officers who understood that military effectiveness required adapting to changing battlefield realities. The kind of urban combat and precision missions that characterized modern special operations demanded skills that rapid-fire training had never developed. The colonel's most significant contribution was protecting Sarah from the institutional backlash that inevitably accompanied such dramatic changes. Career officers whose reputations had been built on promoting speed-focused methods were predictably resistant to reforms that implicitly criticized their judgment. Stone used her position and Sarah's undeniable success to deflect attempts to undermine the transformation before it could become permanently established. The development of the new curriculum required Sarah to articulate teaching methods that her grandfather had never formally documented. The wisdom that had been passed down through demonstration and example needed to be translated into systematic instruction that could be replicated by other trainers. Sarah found herself developing lesson plans that combined advanced ballistics theory with intuitive environmental awareness, creating a hybrid approach that honored both scientific precision and traditional fieldcraft. One of the most challenging aspects of the new program was convincing students to slow down when their previous training had emphasized speed above all else. Sarah discovered that breaking the rapid-fire mindset required more than just teaching different techniques. It required changing how students thought about courage, effectiveness, and professional competence. Many arrived believing that methodical shooting was evidence of indecision or lack of confidence. The breakthrough came when Sarah began using her grandfather's hunting stories to illustrate the principles behind precision marksmanship. Tales of elk hunts in the Bob Marshall Wilderness provided concrete examples of how patience and environmental awareness led to success where aggressive action would have resulted in failure. Students who had dismissed traditional hunting wisdom as irrelevant to military operations began to understand that the same principles applied whether the target was an elk across a mountain valley or a terrorist threatening innocent lives. The psychological transformation was as important as the technical training. Students learned to find confidence in careful preparation rather than rapid action, to view thorough environmental analysis as professional competence rather than excessive caution. Sarah taught them that true marksmanship courage sometimes meant declining to take a shot when conditions weren't perfect, even when external pressure demanded immediate action. The first graduation class under the Enhanced Precision Protocol demonstrated the effectiveness of the new approach in ways that surprised even Sarah. Students who had initially struggled with the methodical pace were achieving accuracy standards that exceeded anything the previous program had produced. More importantly, they were developing the kind of adaptive thinking that would serve them in unpredictable combat situations. The graduation exercise that replaced the old rapid-fire qualification was designed to test everything the new program emphasized. Students faced scenarios that required environmental analysis, patience under pressure, and the judgment to recognize when precision mattered more than speed. The exercise culminated with shots at extreme range under variable conditions, the kind of challenge that the old program had never attempted to address. Sarah watched the graduation exercise with a mixture of pride and amazement at how completely the program had been transformed. Students who had arrived with the aggressive confidence typical of special operations candidates were leaving with something more valuable: the humility to recognize when they didn't know enough to act immediately, and the patience to wait until they did. Marcus Kane was among the first graduates of the new program, and his transformation was perhaps the most dramatic evidence of how effective the changes had been. The man who had once failed a critical shot because he couldn't adapt his training to real-world requirements now demonstrated the kind of methodical precision that characterized truly elite marksmen. His graduation shot, a 1,200-yard engagement under challenging wind conditions, was executed with the patience and environmental awareness that Sarah's grandfather would have recognized and approved. The ripple effects of the transformation extended throughout the special operations community as graduates deployed to active theaters and began demonstrating capabilities that exceeded what their predecessors had achieved. Mission reports started documenting successful precision shots at ranges and under conditions that would have been impossible with rapid-fire training methods. The tactical advantages of having snipers who could adapt their techniques to any situation became apparent to commanders who had never questioned the effectiveness of speed-focused methods. General Hayes recognized Sarah's contribution by promoting her to chief instructor and tasking her with expanding the enhanced precision protocol to other military branches. The woman who had been dismissed as too slow for modern warfare was now responsible for training the trainers who would shape the next generation of military marksmen. Her grandfather's methodology was becoming doctrine that would influence American military effectiveness for decades to come. The international recognition of Sarah's achievement came when foreign military observers began requesting access to the new training program. Allied nations that had been struggling with similar problems in their own sniper training were eager to understand how the American military had solved challenges that had seemed insurmountable. Sarah found herself briefing foreign officers on principles that her grandfather had learned through necessity in the Montana wilderness. The most profound validation of the new approach came through the combat effectiveness reports that began arriving from deployed units. Missions that would have been impossible under the old training methods were being accomplished by graduates who understood that precision and patience could achieve results that speed and aggression never could. The strategic impact of having snipers who could adapt to any tactical situation was changing how special operations forces approached their most challenging assignments. Sarah's personal journey from dismissed candidate to program architect represented more than individual vindication. Her success had demonstrated that institutional wisdom could be wrong, that alternative approaches deserved consideration, and that the most important military virtues sometimes looked like weaknesses to those who didn't understand their application. The qualities that had made her seem inadequate for rapid-fire training were exactly what was needed for the precision challenges of modern combat. The legacy of her transformation extended beyond military effectiveness to broader questions about how institutions evaluate competence and potential. Sarah's grandfather's methodology had been dismissed as outdated until it proved superior to modern techniques under the ultimate test of combat effectiveness. The lesson was applicable far beyond marksmanship training, sometimes the most important. Innovations come from rediscovering wisdom that has been forgotten rather than inventing something entirely new. 2 years after her impossible shot had awakened an unconscious F-22 pilot and saved 12 Delta Force operators, Sarah stood before a new class of sniper candidates at Fort Braxton, the range where she had once failed qualification had been. Renamed the Mitchell Precision Training Complex in recognition of her contribution to military marksmanship. The motto on the wall now read, "Patience, Precision, Purpose," reflecting the philosophy that had replaced the speed-obsessed culture of the previous program. As she watched the new students preparing for their first lesson in environmental analysis and ballistic calculation, Sarah could see her grandfather's influence spreading through a new generation of warriors who would carry his wisdom into conflicts he could never have imagined. The hunting guide who had spent 40 years perfecting his craft in the Bob Marshall wilderness had become, through his granddaughter's courage and competence, one of the most influential figures in modern military training. The woman they had called Grandma Gun and dismissed as inadequate for contemporary warfare had proven that the most important battles aren't always won by those who move fastest. Sometimes victory belongs to those who have the patience to wait for the perfect moment and the skill to recognize it when it arrives. Sarah's legacy would be measured not just in the lives her impossible shot had saved, but in the countless future missions that would succeed, because she had taught a new generation of snipers that precision, patience, and purpose could triumph over any challenge that courage and competence were willing to face. The ripple effects of Sarah's impossible shot began manifesting in ways that no one at Fort Braxton could have anticipated. Within 72 hours of Operation Sandstorm's conclusion, Sarah found herself summoned to briefings at levels of military hierarchy she'd never imagined accessing. The Pentagon's Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to understand how a dismissed sniper candidate had accomplished what their most elite graduates had declared impossible, and more importantly, what her success revealed about fundamental flaws in their training methodology. General Patricia Hayes arrived at Fort Braxton with an entourage that included representatives from every branch of the military, foreign allied observers, and civilian analysts whose job was to identify innovations that could reshape American military doctrine. The woman who had once been relegated to cleaning rifles was now the subject of intense scrutiny from some of the most powerful military minds in the world, all trying to understand how traditional hunting wisdom had succeeded where modern technology and rapid-fire training had failed. The first revelation came during Sarah's debrief with the ballistics analysis team. The shot she'd made wasn't just unprecedented in its accuracy. It had required integration of environmental variables that existing military doctrine claimed were impossible to calculate in real time. The fact that she'd accomplished this integration using intuitive methods learned from her grandfather suggested that conventional training was missing crucial elements that couldn't be replicated through classroom instruction or computer simulation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Pentagon's leading expert on combat psychology, conducted extensive interviews with Sarah to understand the mental processes that had enabled her success. What she discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about how elite soldiers should be selected and trained. Sarah's ability to remain calm under extreme pressure wasn't the result of aggressive conditioning or rapid-fire desensitization. Instead, it came from a deep understanding of environmental systems and the confidence that thorough preparation could overcome any challenge. Specialist Mitchell, Dr. Vasquez explained during one of their sessions, "Your psychological profile shows patterns we've never seen in military snipers. You demonstrate what we're calling systemic patience, the ability to process complex environmental data while maintaining emotional equilibrium under extreme stress. This combination is exactly what modern combat scenarios require, but it's the opposite of what current training programs develop." The implications of Dr. Vasquez's findings extended far beyond sniper training. Special operations forces across All branches were encountering missions that required exactly the kind of adaptive thinking and environmental awareness that Sarah had demonstrated. Urban combat, counter-terrorism operations, and precision strikes in civilian areas all demanded patience and judgment that rapid-fire training actively discouraged. Colonel Stone used these findings to build support for comprehensive reforms that would affect military training throughout the special operations community. Sarah's success had provided proof that alternative approaches could achieve results that conventional methods couldn't match, but implementing those alternatives required overcoming institutional resistance that had been building for decades. The resistance was immediate and predictable. Career officers whose reputations had been built on promoting aggressive, speed-focused training weren't willing to acknowledge that their methods might be flawed. Captain Harrison, despite his reassignment, continued advocating for rapid-fire techniques through informal channels, arguing that Sarah's success was an anomaly that didn't justify abandoning proven training doctrine. Sarah found herself caught between competing forces that wanted to use her success to validate their existing beliefs rather than learning from what she'd actually accomplished. Rapid-fire advocates claimed her shot proved that superior equipment could overcome any tactical challenge. Traditionalists argued that her success validated old-school military values that had been abandoned in favor of technological solutions. Neither group seemed interested in understanding the specific combination of factors that had made her success possible. The breakthrough came when Master Chief Rodriguez presented his analysis of the weapon modifications that had been necessary for Sarah's shot. The technical requirements hadn't been met through advanced technology or superior equipment. Instead, they'd required understanding how traditional ballistics principles could be applied to extreme-range scenarios that had never been attempted before. The success had come from combining old wisdom with new applications, not from choosing between traditional and modern approaches. Rodriguez's presentation shifted the debate from ideological arguments about training philosophy to practical discussions about what actually worked in combat situations. Military leaders who had been resistant to change began recognizing that Sarah's methods offered solutions to tactical challenges they'd been struggling with for years. The question wasn't whether traditional or modern approaches were superior, but how both could be integrated to create more effective training. The development of this integrated approach became Sarah's primary responsibility as she transitioned from vindicated washout to program architect. Working with specialists from multiple military branches, she began designing training curricula that combined environmental awareness with technological capability, patience with decisive action, and individual expertise with team coordination. The first pilot programs revealed both the potential and the challenges of implementing Sarah's methodology on a larger scale. Students who embraced the integrated approach achieved remarkable results, but those who tried to apply rapid-fire mindsets to precision techniques struggled with concepts that seemed contradictory to their previous training. The success of the new methods depended on students' willingness to abandon assumptions about what military competence looked like. Sarah discovered that teaching her grandfather's methodology required more than explaining techniques or demonstrating skills. It required helping students develop entirely different relationships with uncertainty, pressure, and time. Students had to learn that thorough preparation could eliminate most sources of anxiety, that understanding environmental systems could provide confidence that no amount of aggressive training could match, and that true speed sometimes meant taking the time necessary to ensure success. The psychological transformation was often more challenging than the technical training. Marcus Kane exemplified both the potential and the difficulty of this process. His natural talent for marksmanship had never been in question, but his aggressive mindset had prevented him from developing the patience and environmental awareness that extreme-range shooting required. Learning Sarah's methods meant unlearning habits that had defined his identity as an elite soldier. Kane's progress became a case study in how institutional culture could either support or undermine individual development. When surrounded by instructors and peers who valued patience and precision, he flourished under the new methodology. But when exposed to traditional military environments that emphasized speed and aggression, he reverted to old patterns that limited his effectiveness. The success of Sarah's approach required comprehensive cultural change, not just individual skill development. The cultural resistance extended beyond Fort Braxton to military installations throughout the Special Operations community. Field commanders, who had built their careers on rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower, were skeptical of methods that seemed to slow down operations and introduce complexity, where they preferred straightforward solutions. Convincing these commanders required demonstrating that precision methods could achieve strategic objectives that rapid-fire approaches couldn't accomplish. The demonstration came through a series of classified missions where graduates of Sarah's program achieved results that traditional methods had been unable to produce. Urban counter-terrorism operations that had been stalled by the need to avoid civilian casualties were completed successfully by snipers who could make precision shots in complex environments. Hostage rescue missions that had been deemed too risky because of tight quarters and innocent bystanders were accomplished by operators who understood when patience was more valuable than speed. These successes began changing attitudes throughout the military hierarchy as commanders recognized that Sarah's methods offered solutions to tactical challenges that had seemed insurmountable. The question was no longer whether precision-focused training was valid, but how quickly it could be implemented across all relevant military units. The implementation process revealed the scope of institutional change that Sarah's success had initiated. Training facilities had to be redesigned to accommodate environmental variability rather than standardized conditions. Equipment procurement had to be modified to emphasize reliability and accuracy over rapid-fire capability. Most importantly, promotion and evaluation criteria had to be restructured to recognize patience and judgment as military virtues rather than obstacles to advancement. Sarah's role in this transformation evolved from technical consultant to institutional change agent as she found herself briefing senior military leaders about the broader implications of precision-focused training. Her grandfather's hunting wisdom was becoming the foundation for military doctrine that would influence American strategic capabilities for generations to come. The international implications of Sarah's success became apparent when foreign military observers began requesting access to the new training methods. Allied nations that had been struggling with similar challenges in urban combat and precision operations were eager to understand how American forces had developed capabilities that seemed to exceed what conventional training could produce. Sarah found herself conducting briefings for military delegations from countries that had their own traditions of precision marksmanship but had adopted rapid-fire methods in an attempt to modernize their capabilities. Her success had demonstrated that modernization didn't require abandoning traditional wisdom, but rather finding ways to integrate old knowledge with new applications. The most significant validation of Sarah's approach came through long-term performance data from graduates who had deployed to active combat zones. Mission success rates for precision operations increased dramatically when conducted by operators trained in environmental awareness and adaptive patience. Equipment failure rates decreased as soldiers learned to maintain their weapons according to precision standards rather than rapid-fire protocols. Most importantly, civilian casualty rates in complex urban operations dropped to unprecedented levels as snipers learned to wait for perfect shots rather than taking acceptable ones. These results provided the quantitative evidence that military bureaucracies required to justify comprehensive training reforms. Sarah's impossible shot had captured attention and generated interest, but systematic improvement in combat effectiveness convinced institutional leaders that precision-focused methods deserved permanent adoption rather than experimental implementation. The establishment of the Mitchell Institute for Precision Training represented the culmination of Sarah's transformation from dismissed candidate to military innovator. Located at Fort Braxton, but serving all branches of the military, the Institute was tasked with developing and disseminating training methods that emphasized environmental awareness, adaptive patience, and precision under pressure. Sarah's appointment as the Institute's first director completed a journey that had begun with her failure to meet arbitrary time standards and culminated with her responsibility for training the military's most elite operators. The woman who had been told she was too slow for modern warfare was now setting the pace for military innovation that would influence American strategic capabilities for decades to come. The Institute's first graduating class included Marcus Kane, who had completed the most comprehensive retraining program in military history. His transformation from rapid-fire specialist to precision marksman exemplified the potential for institutional change when supported by leadership commitment and evidence-based methodology. His graduation speech acknowledged Sarah's influence, not just on his technical skills, but on his understanding of what military excellence actually required. 6 months ago, I thought speed was courage and hesitation was weakness, Kane told the assembled graduates and instructors. Sarah Mitchell taught me that real courage sometimes means having the patience to wait for the perfect moment, and that true strength comes from the confidence that thorough preparation can overcome any challenge. The shot that saved Operation Sandstorm wasn't just technically impossible. It required a completely different way of thinking about what we do and why we do it. The broader impact of Sarah's success extended beyond military training to influence how American society thought about competence, expertise, and the relationship between traditional wisdom and modern innovation. Her story became a case study in business schools, where students learned about the importance of questioning institutional assumptions and recognizing value in approaches that seemed outdated or inefficient. Academic researchers who studied Sarah's methodology discovered principles that applied far beyond marksmanship or military training. Her grandfather's approach to environmental analysis had implications for fields ranging from meteorology to psychology, while his emphasis on patience and systematic preparation offered insights for anyone dealing with high-stakes decision-making. Under pressure, the philosophical implications of Sarah's success resonated throughout American culture as people recognized that her story challenged fundamental assumptions about progress, modernization, and the value of traditional knowledge. The hunting guide who had spent 40 years perfecting his craft in the Montana wilderness had influenced military doctrine not through formal education or institutional credentials, but through wisdom that could only be gained through direct experience with natural systems. Sarah's legacy was ultimately measured not just in the lives her impossible shot had saved or the training program she had transformed, but in the broader recognition that expertise could come from unexpected sources and that innovation sometimes meant rediscovering rather than inventing. Her grandfather's methodology had proven that the most important military virtues, patience, precision, and environmental awareness, were timeless principles that technology could enhance but never replace. Standing before her latest class of precision training candidates, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed washout to military innovator. The students before her came from every branch of the military and several allied nations, united by their recognition that precision shooting required more than technical skill or expensive equipment. They were there to learn what her grandfather had known instinctively, that true marksmanship was about understanding systems, respecting variables, and having the patience to wait for the moment when everything aligned perfectly. The woman they had once called Grandma Gun had become the architect of a revolution that extended far beyond military training. Her impossible shot had proven that sometimes the most important innovations come not from moving faster or thinking differently, but from moving deliberately and thinking deeply about what actually matters when everything depends on being absolutely right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.